Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Cegelski. And folks, this was one heck of an episode. We have the one and only SVP of Sales at ZoomInfo, Stephen Bryerton. Nick, why should people listen?
Stephen has a really good philosophy he talks about going for the no and asking hard questions. And he gave a lot of great examples of hard questions you can ask that might not feel good in the moment to ask and also hear the answers to, but ultimately help you negotiate better and sell a deal better. And then he gets into how to use that stuff for your next meeting and your next meeting when you start to get to power. So this is a really, really good one. It's a clinic in how you can learn to sell from an extremely tenured exec at ZoomInfo.
And 3, 2, 1, let's roll.
All right, Stephen, welcome to the show. We start every single episode with your top 3 actionable takeaways. So let's get your 3.
Awesome. So first, discovery with the intent to negotiate. So when I think about discovery and we think about discovery as sellers, we often view it too much as a checking the box moment. And so I come in with my surface level questions, my set agenda, and I don't really dig in deep. And I don't hit sort of the hard hitting, why is this customer really here? So what I'm ultimately trying to get upfront in discovery, as uncomfortable as it might be, is I'm going to try to go for the no early on. I'm going to try to ask questions where I'm going to get to a level of, hey, is it worth walking away from whatever their goal and their needs and their wants are for a few $1,000s in spends? Or, is it worth giving up on this now if we're not able to agree on X, Y, and Z? So go for the no, because I can use that far later on when it comes into negotiation if I've laid the groundwork upfront discovery.
What's number 2?
Number 2 is drive for the need, not the want. So when you think about when prospects come to you, they can do so much research nowadays before they ever talk to you as a seller. So they likely have some sort of concept on why they're on the phone today. And more often than not, it's a want. I want to get better at sales. I want to drive more leads. I want to secure my mainframes, whatever it might be. But that want isn't sort of the real driver behind what they're out to accomplish. So when I think about driving for the need, not the want, there is a layer beneath that. So when they say, hey, I need more leads, I'm going to say, oh, that's interesting. Often when I hear I need more leads, it's because your lead channel dried up, or your sellers are finding it more difficult to prospect, or your market just got a little bit more commoditized. So I want to serve those up and get the real want from them.
Serve us up.
3 is a great little acronym. It is PLAN. If you've read Triangle Selling, this is one of my biggest takeaways from that book. You think about, you went through this whole sales cycle, or at least this first call, and you don't leave enough time at the end to get a real plan about what our next steps are. So with PLAN, it's a super simple acronym to think about. The P stands for pivot. So pivot the current conversation into our future discussion. What are we going to do next? What happens next in your cycle? L, logistics for that next meeting. Who needs to be involved? Who should join? When will that call happen and how? A is our agenda. So what are we going to cover? Why are we going to cover that? And then are the next steps, and this is the big piece, with expectations. So it's not just next steps. It is, how do we hold each other accountable? How do we build this mutual action plan so that we are both seller and buyer coming to that next discussion with an agenda that we're going to accomplish together?
Stephen, I want to talk about this plan thing you're using to drive next steps, and then we'll work our way backwards from there. So step 1 of plan is pivot the current call to what happens next. And in our prep, you were saying, don't just be like, all right, now it's time to meet on Tuesday at 6. That's just an abrupt end. So talk to me about the wrap up of a discovery call.
Yeah, when you have that great call, oftentimes you start to build this momentum and you can start to feel that level of engagement. The buyer is agreeing, they're nodding, oh, this would be super helpful. In most of the time, you've outlined 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and maybe you've set an agenda up on the front end of this. I think what a lot of sellers do too much is they'll go right up to that 30 minutes or right up to that 45-minute mark. And then it's like, oh, I forgot to do all of this stuff. So I would much rather build the momentum, get to this precipice of excitement, and then all of a sudden cut it off there. Leave them wanting more, right? Like, we don't have to show everything in the toolkit. Get them really excited, and then all of a sudden start to pivot to like, hey, if feels like, we've got a really good fit here. We've got some good level of engagement. Help me understand your buying process. The last time you purchased software, what did that process look like? The last time you saw something that got you this excited, who did you take it to? What were the conversations you had internally? And all of a sudden now, like, they're far more willing to give you some of those things versus, hey, I'm sorry, Nick, I really have to go. You took up the whole 30 minutes. Send me a quick email and we'll find time later.
Steven, I love this concept of leave some meat on the bone in your product. Leave some meat on the bone in the solutions. I remember what I would usually do is if I was doing a 5-minute harbor tour demo on the first discovery call, I would demo the first 1 or 2 really big problems they wanted to solve. And then I would just pop up the third screen and stop. And I would say, hey, and next time we meet, if this all looked good, we can go through this other page that addresses the third problem you wanted to solve. And that's the thing that pulls them into the next call. I'm curious, how do you think about leaving meat on the bone in your discovery calls? Or how do you go about sort of teasing what's next in the next call?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head that like, hopefully you've latched on to like 1 or 2 really sort of deep-seated pain or like the impact that your solution can have. Like if you're a medic follower, for me, it's identify pain. Like that is the one that I'm going to try to do on every single call. And then I'm going to move on. And so what I try to coach our sellers to do, because I see it all too often, is they're as a seller, we just launched a new product, super excited about all the features and functionality. And so they like hit it out of the gates with the big thing. But then they have like, oh, well, my favorite thing is, let me show you that. So if you show that thing and then they realize, oh yeah, but I don't need that. Now they associate like the expense with things that they're not ready for. And that, like, you just started to lose the sale. And they're not going to usually tell you that, but it is going to be floating around in the back of their head. So I'm much more, get them on a high note and let's start moving on. Go for the sort of next steps right then.
People want everything they asked for. People don't want to buy everything they could have asked for. So if you ever hear the objection, which usually comes upon close lost, that says, this might be more software than we need, that usually means you showed them way too much and you showed them everything that they could have asked for instead of everything that they just asked for.
We're just not there yet, or we're not ready for this. Those are the two. Like when I hear on a call, 95% of the time you go back and you review it and you watch that sort of first demo or whatever they might be pitching, and they threw like everything out there.
Okay, so you're carving out this intentional time at the end of the meeting where you're talking about, all right, how are we feeling? Where are we going to go from here? You're asking some questions to figure out, what are we even going to do in that next meeting? And I want to zoom into the last letter of plan, which is N, where you're talking about next steps. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how you talk through that at the end of the call with your prospect.
We often, in our initial calls, we're meeting with either an individual contributor, someone that feels the pain day-to-day of prospecting. We're meeting with a manager that runs a small team. And so those folks typically aren't the economic buyer, they're a champion. And so what we then want to do is start to uncover and ask the questions around, hey, what did it look like the last time you were excited about something like this? Who did you go and talk to internally? Should they be a part of the conversation? What are the things that that person cares about? You know, in your internal meetings, what are they talking to you about? Right. So now I start to like frame that next meeting with all of their lingo and the things they care about so that I can really nail it. Those are a couple of the big ones. As you get later in the stages, your second, third, fourth call, maybe depending on your sales cycle, you start to think through like, you know, security reviews or legal process or procurement process, or working backwards. Hey, if you want to have this thing, like you told me, by September 1st, how long were all of those steps? Because now all of a sudden we need to have everything agreed upon by August 4th, because we're going to need 3 weeks to get through all of those steps. So we start to re-architect the buying process from our end date, go live date, as opposed to like, they want to sign by this.
Steven, all of this is awesome. If your prospect is really excited and they're like, this is how I've bought software, great, these are the next 2 or 3 steps, let's do the mutual action plan, we're ready to go. What happens in the other case where you start to propose next steps and you get the sense that someone's like, I'm not entirely sure?
So we use this 1 to 10 technique. So it might be something along the lines of like, Hey, Arminds, typically at this point, my buyers are in sort of two camps. Camp one, they're a 10, meaning I wanted this thing yesterday. Why is it taking me so long to get this thing? Or they're in camp one, which is, Steve, you should probably not be in sales and should find a different career. Where do you fall on that spectrum? Right. And then they give you okay, I'm a 6 or I'm a 7 because you didn't quite nail it all. And so you'll ask then the question, whatever they say, I'm a 6. Okay, interesting. What makes you a 6? And they're going to give you, I didn't necessarily see that you had all the contacts that I care about, or it looked maybe a little complex for what I'm trying to do. So you get sort of those negative things. And then you say, okay, what are all those things that you liked? Oh, interesting. Given all that, why aren't we quite at a 9 or a 10 yet? What do we need to do to help get you there and as confident as the other 37,000 customers that use ZoomInfo?
A lot of sellers make the mistake of setting next steps way too early. They think the call is going well in their head, but their prospects haven't said anything that necessarily valid yet. And so before you set next steps, you should always validate that they agree that there's a big problem that you can solve, because they might be 10 steps behind where you want to go. And so if you try to set a next step, they're going to be like, whoa, 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 and they might just reject you entirely because they start to feel the pressure.
The other thing that's happening is the prospect might be nodding and let's say they're at an 8, right? And you can see body language wise, they feel good and they're clearly signaling they want to move forward. What's really cool about that 1 through 10 question is what it does is if they're at an 8, you can figure out where those 2 points were missing. And a lot of the times it's just something that they didn't understand properly. They misunderstood something, or it was, oh, I didn't even show you this yet. Or worst case scenario, it is 2 notches that you're not going to get those points, but now you know about those things. So that 1 through 10 question is really, really powerful, as opposed to just being all right, how are you feeling? Because most people will be we're pretty good.
Discover with the intent to negotiate. So it's just a different way just doing discovery at the end of the call to figure out what do they really like? What do they really care about? What are those sort of deep-seated things that are holding them back a little bit that they haven't yet voiced? And you can do it in a really light way that way. And it doesn't feel like you're attacking them for not loving everything that you just showed them.
So Stephen, we don't need to go through your entire joint execution plan on this interview, but I would love to understand, what do the next 2 steps usually look like?
It's usually going to take one of 2 roads. One is we either have that person that can make that decision on the earlier call, or 2, they're going to bring in those next level folks, building on what we learned and now elevating the conversation. So a seller or a middle level manager is going to care about their day-to-day, their team. The VP of sales, the CRO, the CEO is going to care about broader business impact. So we're going to start to translate that advantage of ZoomInfo that the seller had and extrapolate imagine this across your entire business and what you can expect to return. The other route for us is going to be like a trial motion. There's a lot of data out there. It's one of those things that, right or wrong, is viewed by some buyers as a commodity. And so we are going to sort of put the rubber to the road, and we're going to highlight what real high quality data looks like and where gaps are in most sales team and most alternatives.
So you get on this meeting and you've had a good conversation with, let's say, a director of sales, and you understand the day-to-day pain that they're struggling with. And you're like, ZoomInfo is pretty well equipped to help with this. You talked about wanting to elevate the conversation. My guess is VP of sales or CRO joins, there's specific things that you're doing to make sure that you're not just talking in the same language that you talked about with the director. When you're meeting with that executive for the first time, what are you doing in the beginning of the meeting, whether it's the way that you set the agenda or the way that you recap what you learned before, to elevate said conversation?
Even before that call starts, at the end of that first call, I am going to try to understand, what are you guys talking about in internal meetings? When you have your sales kickoffs, your weekly meetings, your team meetings, your QBRs, whatever sort of you have internally, help provide some color around what the discussion is like. What are those top initiatives, right? I know what our goals are from the CEO on down. And so do you guys have something along those lines? And then that way I can start to build ZoomInfo story into their language and tie it directly to those goals. What I'm also going to do is before that call takes place, I'm going to do some more pre-call research. So I'm going to like review earnings calls if they're a large publicly traded company to find out what their CEO, CRO is talking about for growth expectations. I'm going to look at their company website and I'm going to look at like, what are they hiring for? Are they hiring for marketing roles, sales roles, the things that I care about because that indicates growth. I'm going to look at their case studies and I'm going to look at like who the individual was that gave the case study. What are the key takeaways that that person talked about and where that particular company's solution helped their customers? Because then my demo, my conversation is all going to, again, be put into sort of that language.
I really like the question, what are you talking about in internal meetings? And the reason for that is, I think oftentimes prospects feel like they need to play the role of translator of, hey, we know what the business needs, but let me translate it for this salesperson and tell them what we're looking for. And that's oftentimes why what you described earlier, they come to you and they say, we want this. And you have to go and figure out what's motivating that want. The internal meetings question says, hey, I actually don't need you to translate for me what the priorities are. Just tell me what you're talking about because I can infer then where the real need is. I really like the language in that question.
So let's move to that second call. How do you structure a second sales call?
Yeah, structuring a second sales call is going to be, you're starting to work your way up in the organization. And you want to view those people. They're going to want to hopefully view you as an equal. So this is where you need to show, I have been here. I speak your language. The next 30 minutes that we're going to be spending together is going to be worth your time. The other reason for that is like the person that you spoke to originally and then brought their higher up, their peers in, they're expending political capital internally to bring this meeting together. So you want to make that person look good. Like the last thing you want to do is have that meeting finish and then be like, Steve, why did you bring me to this meeting? That was a total waste of time, right? Like you want them to be leaving that meeting feeling like, Steve, that was incredible. Thank you so much for bringing this to me. So you're going to take all of those things that you uncovered on the first call, the questions that you asked and sort of that plan component. You're going to put together, hopefully, ideally, a custom deck that sort of brings together those bullet points. You're going to bring together customer stories, case study, story, video, something along those lines of their peer set. And you're going to architect that meeting along that whole storyline. So it's going to sound like, hey, Armand, Nick, we had a great first meeting and he talked about A, B, and C. So it might be like his struggle to find great fit accounts, the challenge of people getting to respond to him. And then ultimately, that translates itself across your 20 sellers of misproductivity, sales missing numbers, growth getting harder to accomplish. So in the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk through how we've done what Nick told me for Widget Corp and what their CRO saw as a result. Before we do that, is there anything that I missed? Is there anything that you're thinking about that I didn't touch on? And then you're going to get their need if you didn't. And if you did, great, because it's going to show, Armin, that you really did your homework. Nick set this thing up and it's going to be super valuable for you as the leader.
The mistake that most sellers make is they do a great discovery call. They find all these problems. Someone new gets onto the second call. They start discovery all over again. And what this does is it frustrates your champion because your champion has gone through this entire process. And they're like, why did we even do the first discovery call? They want to get to the action. But the opposite situation is just as bad, which is you hear all this stuff from your champion and you assume that everyone else agrees. So you just jump right into a demo for the second meeting. You need a mix of both. You need to come in and present what you found already, but then let the next person wrap another layer. So you show, you gather a little bit more, and then you continue to present. And as you get later and later in the sales cycle, you move farther away from inquiring for 80% of the call and closer to presenting when you get into things like proposals. But still, there's a constant iteration of discovery that adds on the original things that you've learned in that first discovery call.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, today's buying groups have expanded a lot, like 5 people involved, 8 people involved, 15 people involved. And so you are going to be hopefully bringing those people in. And so you need to at every step show, okay, I can help this individual, I can help that individual, I can help that individual. And everybody feels like their needs are being met. Because the last thing you want is when they sit around in that buying committee they're talking behind your back about you and your product and your seller as a solution, is to say, like, all of a sudden you have these voices of like, well, it only helps Nick, right? It only helps Armand, and it doesn't help me. Because we just made too many assumptions. You want everybody coming to the table of saying, yes, this helps me in this way. Yes, this helps me in this way. Yes, this helps me in that way. We'd be silly not to do this. We can solve all of these areas.
How do you manage that when you have an 18-person buying committee? Because my guess is if you've got a 30-minute meeting, heck, even if you have a 60-minute meeting and there's 18 people on it, there's just not enough time to have even a 2 or 3 minute conversation with each person. So is there any recommendations you have for sellers who are seeing their buying committee get bigger and bigger and bigger?
You're right. Like, if at that point, it becomes very difficult to appease everybody and to get their say. So like, there will be subtle moments that I like to do. And again, this is where like that feeling of uncomfortableness comes into play is, if you have that person on the phone that is, completely disinterested or like not paying attention, you can see because their eyes are this way, and you see they're like chatting away, is just calling that person out, right? It's just saying like, hey, Nick, curious to get your feedback on this. Or, hey, Nick, I want to make sure I'm hitting the mark for you. I know this is super valuable for Armand, but you're a different role, different territory, whatever. Is there something you want to see in particular to make sure this is a home run for you? And again, it's uncomfortable. But like everybody else on that meeting that is bought in, they will feel, and they're like, okay with it. Like, hey, if I'm here, if I'm invested, this person should be too. Or like you also get ahead of it when they are around the negotiating table. Like Nick might have the loudest voice and Nick might be the most dominant personality. And if you didn't get Nick right bought in, or like you let him be disinterested and then go sway the rest of the jury, you start to lose that momentum. So there are those little moments where you can just say like, hey, Nick, I feel like maybe I missed the mark. I've got a few other crew. I just want to get your take and make sure this is valuable for you. And if not, that's okay.
Yeah, I've never heard someone say that Nick has a loud voice before. So you're the first person to say that. So I want to go back to this executive call where it's really just champion plus executive. Talk to me about the level of altitude in an executive demo.
Yeah, this is far more storytelling. For me, this is far more like business case. They usually care about ROI, impact, how it sort of transforms their business, again, whatever they're out to accomplish. So it's going to be far more of a story with like a brief demo component. So like, hey, this is what we've been able to do for this company. They came to us with the same sort of thing. Business was declining, leads were falling off. By relying on ZoomInfo, their close rates went up 47%. Here's like a quick way that they've been able to do that and completely transform, couple clicks, highlight, bring it to life.
It sounds like you're telling a story of like, hey, similar customer, similar problems. There's a narrative here, but then you've got this visual to accompany it. You're showing something in ZoomInfo that, hey, this company over here, Widget Corp, did to be really, really successful, similar to what you're doing.
Yep.
What are you actually showing in ZoomInfo? Are you just showing, and here's how you look up someone's mobile number, or is there more complexity to what you're showing? Where do you fall in that spectrum? What's an example of what you show?
Yeah, this is going to depend entirely on the customer. There are customers that literally just want to build a better list. What you're doing today, where your rep is all over LinkedIn and they're trying to do this, or like you've got 3, 4, 5 different low-cost data alternatives. And so you're stuck carrying the bag of marrying this data together and figuring out what's quality and what's not. Here's how we do that in 3 clicks, right? CIOs at software companies in New York City, boom. For another customer, you're 100% right. It might be architecting an entire workflow and saying, look, what you do today, where you have to have your ops person come into play and you have to make sure your sales are actually following up on those leads and you don't have that visibility. Here's how ZoomInfo's Copilot serves up the target accounts, gives them the insight, and then with our AI emailer completely, tells the story, delivers the message. And now you, as the sales leader, can have sort of full visibility and hold your team accountable to all the things you hope they're doing, but you can't really check down on. So it will vary from customer to customer.
Stephen, this has been a clinic in exec demos. I want to talk about the other direction that the second call could go in. I was coaching a founder the other day, and he got in the good habit of asking for power after every single first discovery call. Be like, I want to get to power. Sometimes you would actually get to power a little bit too early when the champion wasn't even bought in. So first call would be discovery and 5-minute demo. And then second call would be maybe 45 minutes, sometimes an hour with an executive. But the champion wasn't actually a champion yet because they only had a 30-minute call. And so what we resolved to do is say, if the champion's hot and like raring to go, jump for power right away. If they're not, spend a little bit more time with your champion so you can build that champion and get them bought in before you then try to fight a two-front battle in your second call. I'm curious for your perspective on that versus if you're like, nope, just go for power every time in the second meeting.
Yeah, I always want a true champion in my corner. Like, one of the benefits is you all of a sudden, it's like a 2-on-1 game. If you have that true champion, you can collectively co-sell essentially, as opposed to, like you said, having to try to fight the battle on two fronts. We're in a unique position where the ZoomInfo platform provides value every single day for our customers. So I can really seed the deck for my champions and say, and show them, hey, you mentioned this was your territory. Here's something interesting I saw. Are you in front of this? Hey, this person just got added. That's the right persona that you like to talk to. Did you see this change? Because we flag it for our customers. I can really seed the deck there and get that person on our side. Even without that, you do, like I said, you want to have that person singing your praises and in your corner. Also, you want to make them feel important. And so sometimes going for power too early can also often, even though Nick might have the loudest voice, feel like, oh, Steve doesn't even care about me anymore. Like, he's just going for Armand to make this decision and he went above me. And now, like, I'm angry and I have a bad taste in my mouth. So it is a delicate balance. You do want to have their consent almost and willingness to sell with you and bring that person.
Steven, this has been a great interview, but we are running out of time. And so we got to move to the final question. We've talked about a lot of really great things salespeople should be doing. My last question is about a shouldn't. What's one bad habit that you see a lot of salespeople exhibiting that you think they need to break because it hurts them more than it helps?
In the theme of what we talked about today, for me, it is turn off the happy ears. Like, you get the nods like you have with me right now, and I'm too quick to pitch, or I'm too quick to go to product, or, I have some of your buy-in and I feel like, oh, we're going the right way. And so I'm just going to go ask for the business right now. I'm sort of constantly thinking like, what happens? What could go wrong? Why aren't we better than we are? And so, like, I take sort of a negative view of it and a little bit more pessimistic. And so I'm going to try to, with that 1 to 10 question or with some of these areas, try to get them to voice why this wouldn't happen. Like, hey, tell me why this would fall apart. We snap the chalk line 6 months from now. How do you see this thing failing? I can start to uncover like how they visualize this in their business, as opposed to Nick and Armand, super excited. Let's just go. So turn off the happy ears, take maybe a little bit more pessimistic, go for the no. By doing that, you ultimately will find out no is a good thing in sales. No just allows me to stop wasting time versus that prospect that is just always going to tell you what they want to hear. And they're in their pipeline for like 2 years and they just, you can never move it forward.
Amazing. Steven, thank you for joining us. Everybody stick around for a 60-second recap coming up soon.
All right, Nick, it is time for a 2x2 recap email. What do you have for your 2?
So my first one is ask those 1 through 10 questions. How are you feeling? Where do you feel on that spectrum? You'll get way more detail on that answer than if you just ask, so did you like it? The second is ask your prospect the question, what are you talking about in internal meetings? Oftentimes, prospects translate what's going on behind the scenes in their org to think that they make it easier for you. When really, if you understand what they're talking about in the meetings with their execs, it will help you sell in the language that actually resonates with their exec team.
Number 3, do not show too much software. If you show more software than they need, they will associate the premium expense with all of the bloated features that they didn't want to buy, and they will perceive you to be more expensive than you actually are. And then number 4, when you are going into an executive demo, don't just do straight up discovery from zero, but also don't just start pitching and demoing. You want to do a little bit of both. So recap what you heard in the last calls, and then ask that executive, what did I miss? All right, Nick, how can people help us out here?
So one of the biggest things that I picked up from you, Armand, is you talked about in this episode that philosophy of like when you go from meeting 1 to meeting 2, you can't just start discovery from scratch and pretend you didn't have that first meeting, but you also can't not do any discovery on the new party that's there. And you put together this demo deck, discovery deck asset that has 2 slides. One of here's what I heard in our last meeting, and then 2, what does success look like? And I use this deck all the time now when I'm meeting with new stakeholders. And so if you liked the philosophies that Stephen talked about today, we put together this asset that it helped me a lot when I'm selling. There's a link in the show notes. Go grab it, and we'll see you next week on the show.